the inhabitants of Chestermill find themselves trapped in an invisible and indestructible dome. In the forest, Barbie secretly buries a corpse. Meanwhile, Deputy Sheriff Linda will be the Duke County Sheriff who sleeps in the cell. Linda tells him that Sam Verdra reported a loud explosion, so they go to investigate. At Sweetbriar Rose's diner, Rose asks Jim if he's going to the Westlake Parade, but he claims he's too busy to go. Before leaving, he tips her $100, claiming that he is buying her next vote as a member of the council, although Rose points out that he always runs unopposed. Meanwhile, Junior and his girlfriend Angie get closer when he suddenly confesses his love to her. Without reciprocating this feeling, Angie dresses up and reminds him that they're just having fun until he gets back to school. Junior says he wants to drop out of school, which pisses Angie off as he's wasting his free ride out of town. However, Junior claims that he has loved Angie since they were kids because she is the only person who knows his real self. After hesitating, Angie replies that that's why she can't be with him. Angry, Junior grabs her, so she slaps him and leaves. Elsewhere, Mrs. Grinnell invites the newspaper's editor, Julia Shamui, to report on suspiciously inflated propane supplies to the city. She had already called Duke about this, but he claimed that the propane was intended for emergency reserve, although his voice sounded nervous. Curiously, Julia assures Grinnell that she will investigate. Fire trucks are coming to town to take part in the parade, so Linda waves to her fiancé Rusty, who is a firefighter. Also on the way out of town, Barbie calls her client to inform him that Smith did not pay and aggressively tried to renegotiate the terms. Then he sees a police car, so he hangs up and readies his gun. Duke notices that there is no front tag on his car, so Linda reports Barbie's number on the radio after seeing it from the rear license plate. Nervous, Barbie watches their car until it disappears from sight. When he looks back at the road, cows block his path, so he swerves and crashes into a fence. As a result of the incident, he had a flat tire and no spare tire. Suddenly, the ground rumbles, which everyone in the city notices. At the same time, Duke feels a pain in his chest, forcing him to stop the car. Something hits the ground hard and Barbie sees how something invisible cuts the cow in half. Barbie touches the cow's body, but something hits him, causing him to fall and dip his hand in a pool of blood. Then he looks around and sees the barn split in two. Curiously touches the air in front of him and finds an invisible wall on which he leaves a bloody handprint. A teenager named Joe comes over and asks what happened. Finding a blooded cow, Joe checks and touches an invisible wall, also getting hit by it. Meanwhile, Linda checks on Duke, who comments that his pacemaker just missed a beat. Suddenly they get reports that power lines are down all over the city. In the field, Joe keeps touching the wall and assumes it's an invisible fence that hits them only the first time they touch it. Suddenly, lifeless birds fall from the sky. Barbie examines one and discovers that her neck is broken, so Joe assumes that the invisible wall is really high. Then they witness the plane crashing into the wall. Debris falls on Joe, so Barbie dives in to save him. Watching the remains of the plane, Barbie sees an approaching fire truck, so he and Joe rush to stop it from colliding with the wall. The truck stops and one firefighter runs out, only to hit his face against an invisible wall. Joe notices that they can't hear the truck's sirens, so Barbie writes a message on a piece of paper instructing them to call FOW to close all airspaces. Meanwhile, radio host Phil Bushy goes on the air after activating his generators. His colleague Dodie Weaver points out that they are the only ones on the air, despite the fact that each station has its own generator. Phil doesn't care, as it will boost their ratings. At the same time, Linda and Duke stay at the crash site. Linda notices Rusty from the other side, so she walks next to him. When they touch the wall, they are shocked and notice that they do not hear each other. Jim is just at the moment when Duke receives reports of accidents from everywhere. Alarmed, Duke thinks that the city is cut off from the rest of the world. Thinking about this, officers are setting up roadblocks to prevent further accidents. Jim, however, has another contingency plan. Julia arrives, and Duke orders Linda to commandeer her car so they can explore more of the area. When the others leave, Julia notices Barbie and asks him to tell her a story. In the city, couples Carolyn and Alice stop at Chester's Mill on the way to take their daughter Nori to a correctional camp. However, when they notice the speeding police cars, they decide to leave the city quickly. In the forest, Julia and Barbie follow where the invisible wall passes. She wonders if the walls appeared out of thin air, they would quickly disappear. Barbie, however, notes that even if this happens, the military will put them in quarantine. Julia deduces that Barbie is from the army, but he admits that he has not been on duty recently. Then they come across a house that has been cut up by a woman whose arm was amputated by a wall. Jim bursts into the station and demands to make an emergency broadcast. In his room, a heartbroken Junior tries to harm himself until he hears Jim's emergency message on the radio. Jim orders every driver to stop his car, as there is a serious situation all over the city. While on the road, Alice and Carolyn hear this, but ignore it as a marketing ploy. Suddenly, they witness a truck crashing into an invisible wall, so Carolyn stops the car. They go out and Nori has a fit when he repeats, "The pink stars are falling in rows." Joe comes home and asks his sister Angie where their parents are. Then he finds a note saying that their parents have left town, leaving them alone. Julia and Barbie are taking an amputated woman to the hospital. When a lot of patients arrive, the nurse asks Julia where her husband is. Julia thinks her husband works on Sundays, but the nurse reveals that he has not worked on Sundays for several weeks. Meanwhile, reporters flock to the other side of the wall until the military arrives and drives them away. Outside the hospital, Angie sees Barbie smoking and asks for a cigarette. Junior watches them, fuming and unaware that they are just talking about the situation in the city. Carolyn and Alice arrive soon, so Angie takes care of Nori. While Barbie is leaving, Junior looks at him with hatred. That night, Duke comes to the town hall and finds only Jim, as he is the only member of the council who stayed while the others attended the parade. Duke notes that many officers were also present at the parade, so they are understaffed. Jim offers to authorize additional officers, but Duke refuses to have amateurs with badges running around in this situation. Angry that the sheriff is questioning his authority, Jim asks what they will do. When people wonder why they stockpiled propane shortly before the disaster occurred, Duke tells him that it's Jim's responsibility, since he doesn't even know why he needed propane supplies, and Jim laughs because the sheriff turned a blind eye to it. Offended, Duke claims that he had to protect the city and not let it go bankrupt. Jim tells him to calm down, as his pacemaker may fail, which Duke perceives as a threat. At the station, Dodie connects to a channel outside, where they discover that the military is calling the wall a dome that covers the city. Meanwhile, Barbie is packing up her things from her wrecked car when Junior approaches him. Refusing to deal with the young man, Barbie warns him against starting a fight. Suddenly Julia appears and Junior leaves. She then reveals to Barbie that she can't find her husband. She is interested in Barbie, so he tells her that all the hotels are booked. Considering this, Julia offers him to spend the night at their house. Meanwhile, teenagers are having a party on the city bridge. There John finds Ben Drake, who follows him as he inspects the wall, wondering if it has a power source. Suddenly Joe has a fit, he mumbles about pink stars falling in rows. Angie soon comes home, when suddenly Junior takes possession of her. She frees herself and heads for the door, but Junior pulls her back. Angie hits her head on the floor, knocking her out. Worried, Junior apologizes, emphasizing that he didn't want it to be like this. The Duke diner finds residents worried. He announces that 12 residents died today, and they still don't know what's going on. Carolyn thinks they've been attacked, but Duke insists the government will sort things out, so in the meantime, they should look out for each other. Later, Angie wakes up in an unfamiliar room. Junior comes in, so she calls for help. He assures her that no one can hear them, as they are in a shelter from his father's fallout. He assumes that Angie was acting strangely this morning because of the walls that collapsed on their city. Angie thinks Junior is crazy, but he insists he's the only one who knows what's going on with her. Angie pushes him and yells at him, so Junior leaves. While Junior is locking up the shelter, his father Jim sees him. Junior claims he checked the shelter in case they needed it, but it's completely flooded. He then offers to help with their situation, so Jim hugs him. Meanwhile, Julia brings Barbie to their house, where he realizes that her husband Peter is the man he killed. Julia knows everyone thinks Peter is cheating on her, but she still believes her husband will show up. At the same time, Linda and Duke return to the crash site. While Linda wonders why Chester Smeal is trapped, Duke assumes it's punishment for his secrets. Before revealing anything, Duke touches the wall, and a discharge of electricity causes his pacemaker to explode. Later, Barbie tells how he beat Peter when he demanded that he pay his boss. He gave Peter 1 day to pay, but Peter insisted that he had no money. Instead, Peter pointed his revolver at him. Barbie took the gun away, causing a fight that ended with Barbie pulling the trigger. Barbie wakes up to Julia checking on him as he was screaming in his sleep. He starts looking for his badge until he remembers that it fell during his fight with Peter. Meanwhile, sheriff's deputies, Paul and Freddie, arrive at the scene of the accident when a grieving Linda explains that Duke's pacemaker exploded after touching an invisible wall. When Freddie touches them, his watch does not explode, so Linda comes to the conclusion that since his watch is wind-up, only a battery-powered device can be affected. At the same time, Ben is worried about Joe's seizure earlier. Joe ignores this and just asks the diggers near his house about their progress. Since they haven't dug deep enough to find where the wall ends, Joe decides to put the wall on the map. By morning, Dodie picks up another channel and discovers that the dome is not radioactive. Phil convinces her to tell people, but Dodie thinks they'll just scare them if they divulge it without more information. In Briar Rose's PS, Jim helps activate Rose's generator to power the diner. Then Linda arrives and announces Duke's demise. Julia, on the other hand, throws a ball into an invisible wall to attract the attention of a soldier on the other side, but to no avail. When she sees a soldier talking on the phone, she goes to the radio station. At the fallout shelter, Angie attacks Junior as he enters, only to discover that the hatch outside is locked. Junior then carries her back and chains her to the bed. He insists that she is sick, so Angie offers to take her to the hospital. However, Junior refuses, as the guy she shared the cigarette with may still be there. He believes that she loved him, but Angie replies that she never did. To torment him, Angel burns that she and Barbie were close. This angers Junior, so he leaves. At the funeral home, Linda shares with Jim that Duke was like a father to her. She wonders about Duke's supposed secrets, but Jim claims he doesn't know what they were. Reverend Lester Coggins arrives, and Linda leaves. Jim then pushes Lester, seeing that he is high. Lester justifies himself by saying that since it is Judgment Day, he wants to feel elation. Jim reminds him that they got into trouble to save the city. However, Lester corrects him that it was Duke's reason and he just agreed with it. Deciding to clean up their mess, they take Duke's keys and leave. Meanwhile, Julia arrives at the station after overhearing Dodie listening to military broadcasts. At the police station, Linda sees Jim going through Duke's files. He claims he's just looking for Duke's will, which says he left his estate to Linda, making her cry. After comforting her, Jim returns to his car and informs Lester that Duke didn't have the files in his office, so he must have kept them at home. Jim tells Lester to pick up the files while he's focused on the city. At the same time, Dodie shares with Julia that she has developed a harmonic microwave frequency converter for listening to channels outside. After hearing that the military believes they are under the dome, Julia interrupts Phil to pass this on to everyone. The broadcast causes people to panic, so Linda asks them to remain calm while she confirms the information. Paul, however, points out that they don't know anything about the dome. Linda reminds him that they have to keep people from panicking because they might do stupid things. Paul says it's stupid not to panic before he leaves. While driving, Jim sees a tractor heading towards the wall, so he orders the operator to stop, as the car could explode if it touches the dome. To prove this, he says that Duke's pacemaker exploded after touching the dome. After learning that the sheriff is dead, the operator wonders who is in charge now. At the same time, Ben and Joe see a scientist testing the dome by soaking it in water. Joe touches the surface and notices moisture seeping in their direction, so he comes to the conclusion that the wall looks like a sieve. At a convenience store, Barbie buys cigarettes and sees Nori stealing from the store. On the street, No recommends that smoking is bad, but Barbie claims that he is stocking up, noting that if they get stuck there for a long time, people will start selling cigarettes. Given this, he advises her to hold on to the stolen chocolate bar. Unknown to him, the younger one is watching Barbie. At the station, they connect to another communication channel and find out that the military still does not know what a dome is. Therefore, Julia comes to the conclusion that they are not responsible for what lured them there. On the other hand, Barbie returns to the hut where he ran into Peter. There he finds his dog Tag, but Junior approaches him. Junior accuses him of forcing himself on Angie and claims that she belongs to him. Then he hits Barbie and a fight ensues. Barbie pushes him out and hits him aggressively. He then warns Junior that he won't stop next time. At Duke's house, Lester rummages through his files until he finds a propane bill. He burns them, but accidentally sets the curtains on fire. On the road, Linda and Freddie are stopped by Paul, who hands them rifles. He believes that chaos will begin in the city, so they must prepare. He then sees Barbie and points his gun at him, but Linda tells him that he is the man who saved Joe. Suddenly, she receives a message that Duke's house is on fire, so they rush to him. People gather near the burning house, but since the fire brigade is outside, there is no one to extinguish. Arriving with the officers, Barbie orders the residents to grab their hoses and buckets to help. Julia then arrives at the scene, noting that the fire could engulf the entire city, as they are trapped. Just then Lester screams for help and Linda rushes inside to save him. As soon as they get out, a propane tank explodes nearby. Citizens are lining up to pass buckets of water to put out the fire, but it continues to spread. Finally, Jim arrives with a tractor to demolish the house and contain the fire. Meanwhile, Angie tries to remove the chain from her leg until Junior returns. He claims to have taken care of Barbie, but Angie doesn't believe he could have done something so terrible. He then hands Angie their picture to remind her of what they are working for. A moment later, the fire is extinguished, and Lester is lying on a stretcher. When asked why he caused the fire, Lester tells Jim that he cleaned up their mess. Linda approaches them, so Lester lies that he was buying a suit for Duke's funeral, and Jim supports him, adding that there was probably a gas leak. The townspeople rejoice that they are extinguishing the fire together, but Paul indicates that the smoke from the fire is stuck inside. He takes his gun and starts shooting at the dome. However, one bullet bounces off and hits Freddie. Barbie quickly disarms Paul, while Linda cries when Freddie dies.